Welcome to the RSP cast. I'm Matt Waldman with the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. Today's episode, we're going to do a solo cast on the 2026 running back class. It's considered a weak group of prospects relative to recent years, but is that simply because the league and the public are sleeping on one too many viable options? Well, I'm going to discuss one or two prevailing thoughts I have about at least 45 of the 53 running backs that's going to be featured in the 2026 RSP, the pre-draft publication. It's available for pre-order at mattwaldman.com, www.mattwaldman.com, and it'll be available for April 1st download. Now, if you haven't purchased the RSP in the past, it's a PDF draft guide, covers at least 150 players at the offensive skill positions, a quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end, and I'll probably have closer to 160 to 165 this year. It's been available for download every April 1st, going on 21 years. And for over a decade, I've been delivering a post-draft guide 1 week after the NFL draft, a week after the final day of the NFL draft. And that's part of the subscription price for a total of $21.95. So for $21.95, you're getting literally a 1,200, 1,300 page draft guide, sometimes more, covering 160 prospects. And you're getting a post-draft guide that's going to update where I think these guys are really benefiting from landing spot, giving you depth chart analysis on where these players land, so you kind of have an idea of how long you should expect for these players to be able to make an impact, or whether they're going to have to wait a little bit more. Good fits, bad fits, cheat sheet that kind of helps you understand where players are getting drafted, but also where my rankings coincide with those draft values, so you can see whether you should wait or you should pick them a little bit earlier. I have something called an X value formula that I use that helps you understand where you should be taking these guys within reasonable value. So like if I'm telling you, like I have in the past, that Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes or Nick Chubb or Cooper Kupp were high-end values relative to where their ADP was in rookie drafts and to their draft capital, even relative to that. I didn't say I may think these guys are worth elite values, but you don't have to pick them first overall. I can tell you, this is based on ADP. You can probably get this guy as the 26th pick or the 31st pick or the 36th pick and end up with running back value, elite value, number one caliber value for a lot less. So this is how I make my living. If you like the podcast, the YouTube channel, social media that I do, all of that content is simply me sharing a small amount of my background research for the publication. And I go deep with the RSP. It helps you go deep with your knowledge, and that way you can go deep on your league mates. So what I'm sharing sounds like there's a lot of information, and that's great. And a lot of people will talk it up, and I think I would say the way I would characterize the Rookie Scouting Portfolio is that it's low on frills and huge on substance. New readers always tell me they're pleasantly shocked with what they get, and that's kind of become my tagline. That's kind of what I've used with that. So I'll share a little more detail about the Rookie Scouting Portfolio later in the podcast. This is an A to Z show on running backs, and like my previous solo casts in recent years, I'll be sharing one or two things about these ball carriers and I find notable, and I do it in alphabetical order. These thoughts are going to fall into categories like of praise or criticism, lingering questions I might have, or even broader thoughts about evaluating the position. These are far from complete scouting reports. For the full deal, $21.95, mattwaldman.com. It'll get you that, and you'll likely tell me basically from your feedback that you're going to feel like that you were underpaying for this. That's generally what happens. Is I like to joke from the extreme example is that if you're on X or social media, the first step to becoming a lifetime subscriber is to think I'm an idiot about football. Then maybe change your mind a little bit and start listening to some of the work that I do, or reading it, or checking out the videos. And next thing you know, you take a chance on this thing and you're like, you should be charging twice as much. That's kind of the path from an extreme standpoint. Most people, I would hope most people don't think I'm an idiot, but they do tend to check out the book and go, wow, I heard a lot of hype, but I didn't expect it to to be even better than what I imagined. And I'm selling you, but that's the truth of the matter. I mean, so let's go ahead and get into the running back class. We'll start with thoughts on the 2026 class. Last year, wide receiver lacked really that primary receiver star power of the previous 3 years of classes, and tight end had some skilled talents, but most of the fantasy leagues didn't really value the position highly, and quarterback was maybe 2 to 3 deep. Running back was the strength of the 2025 class in terms of skill positions, but the demand for the position was low. I mean, the potential for most of these players to earn low NFL draft capital was something that I said would complicate matters, and it did, But when you look at the players who had successful fantasy production, Omarion Hampton was 35th, and that part of that was due to injury, but also that Najee Harris got injured too, because Harris simply was outplaying him early once he returned to the field. Hampton might have wound up 35th anyway. Kyle Monangai, 33rd, as a guy at the back of the depth chart that nobody really was talking about, other than maybe the RSP, who emerged on the second half of the season as a co-starter. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, another RSP favorite, 31st. Woody Marks, 29th. Quinshon Judkins, 26th. Trevion Henderson, thanks to injury, 21st. R.J. Harvey, 20th. Same thing, due to injury. And Ashton Jeanty, 11th. And you would think that Ashton Jeanty was the worst running back of everybody on this list, the way that some people were criticizing him, but he was 11th overall. These guys all became factors early or due to injuries, as I said. The 2026 running back class enters a league where 33 of the top 48 performers in 2025 in fantasy have 5 years of experience or less. And only 4 of the top 48 were over the age of 30. So a lot of these guys are in their prime or peak of their career. And of those 4 aging options who are left, maybe one of those jobs is going to be available for a rookie at the beginning of the year. I mean, Derrick Henry's one of those options. Nothing's coming available there unless he gets injured. Forecasting which of the rookies that's going to get one of those spots, it's just not as easy as ranking their talent. There's a real narrow margin of difference between most prospects. There's a tenth of a point separating the players in Tier 2 this year, and there's 3.9 points separating the running back 4 and the running back 17 in Tier 3. So these first 17 players have grades that are good enough for them to contribute meaningful value in a lineup. It means that a running back ranked in the middle to lower end of the top 17 could easily become one of the most productive options among this group. And this is presuming, of course, that he gets an opportunity and that maybe he improves on one or two facets of his game quickly, or he's in an offense that's a suitable fit for his talents. And that's not always the case. Teams sometimes draft players based on some aspects of their games and overlook things that are going to make a difference. Most of these backs are going to probably earn low or zero draft capital this year. The 1 to 3 that earn good draft capital probably will compete for roster spots and playing time, but fantasy GMs probably want to draft running backs a little bit later, in the middle of the late rounds. I still recommend drafting running backs often in fantasy leagues, but make sure the bulk of them have value in the middle of the late rounds. Some things that you want to consider this year is that there is talent in this class. It's just that the buzz has been steadily deflating their value this year. And receivers are the strength of this class, even if it's not as strong as it has been in recent seasons. And we have an instant starter talent at quarterback this year, Fernando Mendoza. There's also some compelling move tight ends. But remember, the landscape, if you listen to the tight end podcast, the landscape of what makes the position value may be changing. So there's also the hobby's realization that receivers and quarterbacks offer more consistent long-term value for a fantasy roster. So we know that Jeremiah Love is going to be the first-round pick at quarterback. At running back. He's going to be a first-round pick. Now, we might see 1 to 2 others earn picks in the second or third round, and we'll see a few more in the fourth, but the bulk of the running back class will probably earn a spot with a team between rounds 5 to 7. And a lot of names that you're going to see valued highly in the RSPs rankings will likely be late round picks and undrafted free agents. The widespread narrative about this year's class is that it's bad. But with the difference between above average, average, and below average, if you're going to tier it that way, essentially amounts to plus or minus one running back. So I think it's probably best to presume that most running back classes are worse classes than advertised, because most running back classes people tend to say are pretty good or above average. And so I would say maybe presume that it's one less player than you expect. This year's going to be the exception. I'm going to say it's probably best to presume that this class is a better class than advertised and to exploit the potential values during the second half of your drafts. If you make that presumption, I think you're still more likely to place a higher value on receivers and quarterbacks to build your team and trade for established running backs once you develop a stockpile of fantasy talent elsewhere. But if you make the presumption that this running back class has underrated talent, but most of them will be day 3 NFL picks or UDFAs, then the wisest course for most fantasy squads that are not 1 to 2 runners away from serious contention is to trade current picks for later picks in 2027, 2028. I mean picks in the next year, not later picks. You're going to get earlier and more. You're going to get picks that are earlier in the draft and more of them in future years when you trade this way. Now, the suggestion with this strategy has nothing to do with the talent of the classes in 27 and 28. It's the idea that you're going to get earlier picks and more of them making these deals. And if the class doesn't have the talent to stockpile running backs or other positions to trade for, down the line, you can just trade again and acquire even more draft capital for 2028, 2029. If you're only 1 to 2 runners away from fantasy prominence, though, this isn't really a good class to acquire them in the early rounds other than Jeremiah Love. He's the one safe bet in terms of talent, draft capital, and opportunity. The rest are underrated talents, and I think they'll we'll likely have one that gets draft capital or an opportunity, if not both. But the thing is most of them will probably have one of those characteristics, draft capital or opportunity, and that means that you're just hoping for a patience play. Another strategic suggestion is to acquire one of the top 3 to 5 receivers in the first round, and then take your chances on running backs in the other rounds. And then I would say a third option is to trade away your first and second round picks for more early picks in the next 1 to 2 drafts, and then just take chances on these unsung runners in the later rounds. But I would say really, why not go after the receivers in the early rounds in this draft? So anyway, the top 17 backs in this class, I think, are all capable of delivering fantasy value this year if given an opportunity. They have a good fit, and they have a quick acclimation process. And I think there's 34 runners in this class with the talent to become a running back 2 or running back 3 on a depth chart and be a viable weekly contributor when there's an injury to a starter. All right. So that's my thoughts on the 2026 class overall. Let's get into some of these players here. We're going to start with Adam Randall at Clemson. He's a former wide receiver, big back, over 230 pounds. His size should be an asset against contact, and sometimes it is. His pad level, though, is what needs work, and that's why it's not a constant. It's more of a variable. In some runs, his pads are too high, and he gets caught with his hit. Basically gets caught with hits into his frame, and these are hits that he probably should have run through if he had lower pad level. And then on other runs, Randall brings his pads over his waist, and he does it in a way where he loses balance before he even reaches the point of attack. So Randall just doesn't have a great feel for pad level right now. As a young running back who converted from wide receiver, we're going to want to see him get better at this. Al-Jay Henderson of Buffalo, most of you probably haven't heard of him. He has starter size. He has enough explosion to threaten a secondary when he earns a long enough runway to get there. So you can see that the acceleration is the question mark here. But put him in a gap scheme with some inside zone sprinkled in, and I think he can find cutbacks that earn him a big runway like that on occasion. So he may flip the field every once in a while. I think he has good hip mobility. He's got curvilinear bend and the confidence to hit tight creases and take what the defense gives. So this is a combination that gets him into creases and out of them. From there, Henderson finishes well enough to generate yards after the contact. I don't know if this guy's going to even get a UDFA opportunity, but if he does, he might be worth keeping an eye on him a little bit, just if you're a fan of the team that he gets signed to. And if he surprises with a little bit more with his explosion, then there might be something there to consider. Anthony Hankerson of Oregon State. He fits that Kyron Williams, Devonta Freeman mold of runner in terms of size, dimension, style. He has a low center of gravity. He makes intelligent decisions between the tackles, and he's just creative enough to get more than what's blocked for him. Hankerson's speed needs a longer runway to reach its top gear than what might prove viable in the NFL. So unlike Williams and Freeman, Hankerson lacks the play strength and contact balance of these starters. Ayo Adeye, he is from James Madison, formerly North Texas. He's a cutback runner. He's got a low center of gravity. He also has curvilinear speed and starter caliber footwork and agility. Adeye's speed and acceleration are enough to make the NFL in theory. But in practice, there's a glut of running back talent in the sport, and that's up the current baseline for these athletic skills that Adeye doesn't really have to that extent. Chip Trayanum. Chip Trayanum is a former linebacker at Ohio State. After he moved to running back there, he then moved to running back at Kentucky and then wound up at Toledo. While the processing speed isn't where he needs to be in the NFL, Trayanum has made enough gains between last season and this season that there's reason to project more gains could be possible with him. He's become a decisive gap runner. He's beginning to press creases as a zone runner. And if the depth of these presses isn't enough for the professional game right now, doesn't mean that it might not get better. Trayanum is now doing a better job of pressing some of the interior gaps on perimeter runs that he didn't do in previous years. And you can see the processing with Trayanum kind of bogging down right now, and you can see it when he's hopping during his gait while assessing potential creases behind the line of scrimmage. Le'Veon Bell would hop behind the line of scrimmage like this, but this was a ploy or technique to set up a lane or a defender. Trayanum is hopping well before he's even setting up a path, and I think that hop often precedes more tentative behavior from him. C.J. Donaldson, Ohio State. He's a former tight end converted to running back. Donaldson's a one-speed power runner. He lacks notable acceleration, but if you give him a grease to hit, he's going to create. Feed him the ball in underneath zones as a receiver, he's going to make the catch. Ask Donaldson to create when what's supposed to be blocked for him isn't there, and he'll find solutions there too, but you're not going to expect big gains from him. Kennesaw State, Coleman Bennett, not far from here. Bennett is a decisive tight crease runner if he spots the anticipated opening and understands the defense and play design. When he doesn't, or the crease is clogged, his decision-making can go to extremes, and this will lead to worse outcomes in the NFL than it occasionally does in the college game. But the saving grace for Bennett is that he accounts for game scripts and field position as a decision maker, which makes him a promising game manager that I think NFL teams want from running backs in the black zone and red zones. So he's kind of intriguing as a UDFA type. Daniel Highshaw Jr. of Kansas. He's a smart runner. He can execute gap or inside zone schemes. He processes information as a runner at a starter level. I mean, he spots penetration. He finds cutbacks. He presses creases deep enough to set up those rushing lanes. Highshaw's power, his footwork, his change of direction, they're all also at starter level of play. But what's hurting his game is ball security, pass protection, and route running. Devon Booth of Mississippi State. My first impression of Booth was that he was a more explosive Kyle Manon guy without Monangai's relentless power in the open field. Because Booth has a low center of gravity and pads, and footwork he uses well are to, he uses them well to bounce off hits from linebackers and safeties. He'll work through reaches. He wards off contact with his stiff arm, and he can pull through some wraps after he's dragged the defender along. And I still stand by that Monangai characterization somewhat, but there's more to his game. Booth's creative skill in the open field while operating at a good rate of speed, as well as his curvilinear movement, reminded me of Dalvin Cook and Khalil Herbert, a pair of accomplished runners between the tackles who can break big play runs that flip the field, if not breakaway runs from the pack. Then I watched Booth catch the ball, and he was more reliable than Herbert and more dynamic than Cook. Booth can take contact while adjusting to targets that lack pinpoint accuracy. Combine the best of Monangai, Herbert, and Cook, and you get back the caliber of J.K. Dobbins before the Achilles tear and knee surgeries. I just said that I thought that that Booth was a little more dynamic than Cook, but I would say maybe dynamic in terms of movement skills. Let me qualify that. I don't know if he's overall more dynamic than Cook. I wouldn't put it that way. But as a mover, I think he's more dynamic. Booth isn't really on J.K. Dobbins' level as a creator or after-contact runner, but he has the athletic ability and skills to do a mean rendition of Khalil Herbert circa Chicago. But the difference is that I think Booth has legitimate passing down potential that Herbert didn't. All right, Dean Connors of Houston, formerly with Rice. He's a good receiver. He gets both hands tight when attacking with overhand position. He takes hits to his back or chest and maintains possession. And he can win the ball, on the numbers. He high points. He doesn't leave his feet unnecessarily when the ball's over his head. He extends well with his arms wide of his frame and well above his head without leaving his feet. And he has late hands, so he's even good at waiting for the ball at the last moment to attack it so he doesn't tip off defenders. He turns behind his break path well, when especially facing tight coverage trailing, and he'll also even turn away and catch the ball while breaking in the opposite direction or falling backwards. He has good positioning after he makes the catch, and I like the fact that he attacks at the earliest point of vertical routes with his back to the quarterback. It's the place where Connors has lapses is clap attacking when he has to reach over his head with overhand attack. But he's aware of the boundary, tracks the ball over his shoulders well, and I think that he has some acrobatic skill, and he can even use one hand and show some of that hand-eye coordination that makes him, an above-average receiver. All right, Damon Claiborne. Now, if there's an area that can limit the 188-pound Claiborne ceiling as a professional, it's that frame. It's that size, 188 pounds. There's going to be legitimate questions about how much of a workload Claiborne can handle each week. And, the question will be, will the league be too punishing for this Wake Forest running back? Javid Best was a great young running back, but concussions forced him to retire after 3 years in the league, and he was a dynamic speedster at 5'9", 190. There's some questions right now about Bucky Irving's workload moving forward. He's 5'10", 195, couldn't get healthy last year after suffering an injury that usually doesn't take so long to heal, and now they held on to Sean Tucker, and they added Kenny Gainwell. So maybe they're squeezing out Irving, at least squeezing him out of the high volume starting role and using him more as a change of pace. We're going to find out. Clinton Portis even weighed 190 to 195 out of Miami when he had a fantastic rookie year for Denver. Now, according to my buddy Cecil Lammy, Portis was even lighter by season's end. So this inspired him to add significant muscle, and he played most of his career between 215 and 225. Now, at the same time, despite those guys not having as much success long-term, James Cook and Charlie Garner are 190. Garner was a change of pace for most of his career, but he had 4 seasons as a starter or co-starter for the 49ers and Raiders where he averaged 1718 yards per game. 1,718 yards per, not per game, but from the line of scrimmage, and 7.5 touchdowns during that space. He only missed 3 games during that time, and it was really 1 game a year for 3 of those 4 years. Cook has averaged 1,582 yards from scrimmage and 12 2/3 scores for the past 3 years. And he's only missed 1 game out of 51 on the schedule. Then you got Jamal Charles. He played at 195 to 200. He had 5 seasons out of 6 where the yardage was better than Garner's 1,718-yard average during that 3-year stint. And his touchdown totals, Charles' touchdown totals, were on par with some of James Cook's best efforts. So Portis, Garner, and Charles were dynamic movers. They held up under strong workloads in college. And Charles had, 582 touches in 3 seasons at Texas. Garner had 330 touches in 2 seasons at Tennessee. Portis had 461 touches at 3 seasons in Miami. Cook was the only back from this group with less than 300 career touches. He had 297 in 4 years. And, to compare that to Damon Claiborne in 4 years at Wake Forest had 613 touches. Claiborne's a skilled pass catcher. He's a decent blocker with flashes of high-end skills there, and he's a promising route runner. So Claiborne's 188 pounds may not be the question mark we believe it to be. Now, I don't think he's going to get the chance to prove it right away as a lead back, but he's going to get to open some eyes as a playmaker early in his career and seen enough touches that fans and teammates want more, and the NFL team that takes him might realize that it's worth taking a chance to see. Pittsburgh's Desmond Reed, I would say very dynamic player, open field runner, good pass catcher, better between the tackles than you'd expect for a guy his size, even though his size might limit how much touches he actually gets. But Reed's pressure cuts can be a problem when he's running at top speed. The foot working off the plant step, it's got to get further in front of him and steady on the ground. And I've seen him fall backwards. It's not fall backwards. I've seen him fall down because he hasn't happened to get his feet stabilized on these cuts across the face of defenders in open space. You also see where maybe the step was far enough in front, but he's putting his weight outside that plant step and slides to the ground trying to bounce outside. So he can make pressure cuts and maintain his footing, but this is something, some of these cuts he has lapses with. Tulsa's Dominic Richardson, before that Oklahoma State. This is a physical runner. He fits well in the run schemes that move NFL teams are adopting, move NFL teams. He's a physical runner who fits well in a scheme where there are more teams adopting these gap schemes. He has just enough shiftiness to thrive on a steady diet of off-tackle zone, inside zone, and gap blocking. Now, despite limited speed and acceleration, Richardson can extend downhill runs between the tackles because of his contact balance, his cutback ability, and his shiftiness in open space. So I'd keep an eye on him a little bit, more as a reserve, but you're going to see some good things from him in the preseason, I think, when he has an opportunity to be a power back. Oh, Navy's Eli Heidenreich. He's a special teams guy, I think, more as a return specialist and coverage option, who I think he can contribute on offense as a 4th or 5th receiver, but more likely as a utility player who earns touches as a running back, more or as much as he earns as a receiver. Now, the ball carrying skills that Heidenreich has are really on the perimeter and open field. He's more of an extension of the ground game in space, and I think that that's something that we need to understand, is that he's probably got more upside as a receiver, and he's probably closer to being a good receiver than he is a between the tackles runner, because of the way he was used. It was more in space and perimeter, and it's harder to learn how to run between the tackles if you really haven't done a ton of it. Draw plays don't really count. That's open field space running, just starting in the middle of the field. At least by design, that's what they hope for. USC's Eli Sanders. Now, this is an explosive gap runner. He has competent zone running skills, and he's got breakaway speed and strong acceleration, and the footwork is good enough to create a lot of these spaces for liftoff. So Sanders has an ACL tear. If he can get healthy enough within the next year or two, he might make his way into a lineup. He's got he doesn't have significant power, but he runs with good enough pad level and breaks tackles when he generates momentum. And because he can get his feet high at the point of attack from low shots, he avoids wrap-ups that drop less agile backs. I think he's a guy that I don't have rated very high, but I could see him surprising. Emmett Johnson of Nebraska. He is this year's candidate for the NFL Combine threw a red herring into the collective drafts analysis. That's how I would describe that. Because let's start with his 40-yard dash. He ran 4.56 seconds. It's the same time Aaron Jones had when they had similar dimensions at this point in their careers. That 4.56 mark is fast enough to start in the NFL. So is the 4.29 second 20-yard shuttle, while the 4.3 second mark for that 20 shuttle would be at the minimum standard guidelines for the starter tier. Johnson's just inside of that. For whatever it's worth, though, remember that these times are being measured by technology that's either second or third rate and has a higher variation with these times that makes these measuring tools much less reliable than they want you to believe. The 4.56 and the 4.29 second marks for the 40 and the 20, they're considered underwhelming marks for Johnson because the media and draft culture have been brainwashed to overvalue relative athletic score percentiles. Listen, RAS has a use, and it can be an informative resource, and it's definitely entertaining. And there's value to knowing that what percentile of the NFL Combine participants' performances looks like relative to his peers. But I think it unintentionally creates noise for that, for what they're trying to have as a signal. The real signal is knowing what the minimum expected times should be for each position based on physical dimensions, style of movement, and expected role. Whether, is that time a minimum for an elite player, for a starter, for someone who's a contributor who rotates in and out of the lineup, or someone who only has like a small situational role or a reserve role. There are numbers you could kind of look at there that might give you the baseline a little bit more. And these factors would provide valuable context well beyond RAS percentile. So when Johnson at his 3-cone drill, he ran 7.32 seconds. Well, the RAS percentile apostles of the pseudoscience church of oblong moneyball that bounces too funny for predictability in everything baseball does immediately, they cited this 32nd percentile 3-cone drill like they were saying amen from the pews of Lucas Oil Stadium. Let's dig a little deeper into this good book of that they're spouting here. So first of all, the 3-cone drill time commensurate with a starting running back in the RSP is 7 seconds flat or less. But there are backs who contributed or have recently contributed at a high level with no better than reserve tier 3-cone marks of 7.2 seconds. Kenneth Gainwell, 7.26 seconds in the 3-cone drill. Dalvin Cook, 7.27 seconds in the 3-cone drill. Samaje Perine, 7.25. Jamal Williams, 7.25. Chris Carson, the Seahawks starter, a high-end starter, 7.53 seconds. Okay? Devin Singletary, 7.32 seconds. These backs came in all shapes and sizes. You got Perine, who's the bulldozer with straight line game. When he changes direction, he's kind of working from a base that helps him work through contact. Chris Carson wasn't as extreme in this respect, but there were similarities. And then you got Devin Singletary and Kenneth Gainwell. The compensatory factors for their lackluster times is their mental processing of information at the line of scrimmage and the speed of executing solutions that combine a variety of tools that a lot of backs that possess a lot more athletic ability just can't perform. Both Singletary and Kenneth Gainwell possess precise footwork. It's footwork that might not work for the 3-cone drill, but it's optimal for football. And I would say Williams was a combination of both groups. He was a downhill banger, but he also possessed processed the field well enough to be a step ahead in certain situations, like short yardage in the red zone. Now, the player on this list that stands out alone was arguably the best of the group. That was Dalvin Cook. And I was there when the Spark denomination of the percentile of possibles was the pseudoscience church of oblong money ball that bounces too funny for predictability in everything baseball does. We're ready to doom Cook for football, condemning him to hell basically because of a 3-cone drill and a vertical that weren't up to their expectations. And it wasn't pretty. But here's what I shared about Cook that they didn't consider. And if they did consider it, they couldn't do anything about it because of the limits of the data collection method of the drills. The 3-cone drill changes the direction we see from players performing lateral cuts. The correct assumption is that most running backs make lateral cuts when they change direction. But Dalvin Cook was an exception. When you watch his film, much of his change of direction was rooted in curvilinear movement, bending around an obstacle at a high rate of speed. The best at this skill can bend tight enough at that rate of speed that it can be effective as making cuts. Well, Cook didn't even use lateral cuts as a runner. If you watch, very rarely, if ever, I didn't ever see him make one. In some cases, you'd see his feet move in place like little pistons moving up and down before he rotated in the direction he wanted to run. You can watch this yourself on YouTube highlights. You're going to see it. Cook's curvilinear movement was a compensatory factor if you're comparing one-to-one to lateral cuts. Another perspective is that curvilinear movement is simply a style of movement that some players favor. Patrick Mahomes is a curvilinear runner when he breaks the pocket. But because the general public and the apostles of the oblong money ball, I ain't saying that whole mouthful again, since those apostles didn't consider that their methodology for measuring performance cannot be one-size-fits-all, Cook's stock fell in the public eye. Now, the Vikings knew better. They knew enough to take him in the second round. And Cook had a 8-year career with 4-year peak that where he had at least 1,300 yards from scrimmage. His best season was a 1,918-yard season from scrimmage with 17 touchdowns. These 4 peak years happened in consecutive fashion. They also happened after Cook tore his ACL during his rookie year. So in addition to everything else mentioned, the 3-cone drill is not an everyday football drill. It's one of the more difficult drills to perform with the technique to maximize the results, and only 13% of the combine participants even did it. So Johnson was the only running back to do it this year. The 3-cone drill has the lowest participatory rate for a while now, and it's because it's a skill unto itself rather than an exercise to mimic the Drew skill. They need to get rid of it, if you ask me, or find something better. Because if a player does well, it matches what I see on the field. I'm going to cite the 3-cone drill because they had to train for it. They went above and beyond to get the technique down, And there's going to be somebody listening to this who say, well, if they prepared and did what they're supposed to do for this, then it shows that they really want this and that they're going to prepare what they do in the NFL. It's a nice logical thought, but there's a fallacy for that. Okay. There are guys who don't train for certain things because they know that it's a waste of time and that they already possess the skills enough to be on a field and don't have to prove anything. All right. And so there's some of that goes in there. I mean, there's a lot of football players who, when they get a chance to tell a coach later on, when the coach said, so when I shared all this information with you, was it helpful? And the player was like, Coach, to be honest with you, nobody listens to you at this point. There's too much information you're trying to share. The good coaches put you in a situation to where you can leverage your athletic skills without thinking too much to make big plays. So anyway, going above and beyond or training, from that standpoint, I mean, I like that they went above and beyond, but I'm not going to put a blanket, statement about all players about that and whether they're good. Now, if they didn't train for it and ran well, they're even quicker on the field than the drill indicates. So that's a good thing too. But if a player doesn't do well and it doesn't match what he does on the field, honestly, I just throw it out in the 3-cone drill. If too much is made about this drill, in a total, I'd rather just tell you why it's a bullshit drill. Unlike Cook, Emmett Johnson, back to him, executes cuts with his game, and like Cook, he leans hard on curvilinear movement, so he can do both. Johnson also flips his hips efficiently. That allows him to make 90-degree turns without the need of cutting. And like Devin Singletary, he processes information fast, and he can be a step ahead. Repeatedly, Johnson identifies pre-snap tells from defenders. He leverages it for quick cutbacks or bounces to open space. And post-snap, Johnson has precise feet to press deep enough into the line to work past a defensive push or penetration. He gets to buy time to assess them and manipulate. Johnson also runs a lot of gap plays, so there's not a lot of need for cutbacks, bounces, or reversals of field in this scheme. The back pay, he basically plays with pace and stride length if needed, but otherwise he hits the crease hard and without hesitation. Now, he's not just a gap runner. He's skilled and experienced with duo and varieties of his own too. But he's got precise footwork, and maybe his jump cuts aren't as electric as the altar boys, confirmed by the apostles of Moneyball, want it to be, but he gets his feet over contact and he alters stride and pacing with his steps. So I think that, I always think of like Frank Gore when folks cite drills instead of footwork on tape. Gore is like the age cliff sitter man with 2 ACL tears who befuddled these apostles when he was quicker and more precise and more productive on the field on the same plays and obstacles that someone like their appointed Bishop Anthony McFarland was. So last I heard that the data papacy quietly transferred McFarland to the UFL branch. So, yeah, keep an eye on Emmett Johnson. Freddie Brock at Georgia State. If Brock could sharpen his third down game and show decent short-range explosion, I think he could earn a reserve role, especially if he can play special teams. Jamari Taylor, he's at UVA. He has the footwork and cutting ability to create space with efficiency and dynamism. It makes Taylor dangerous between the tackles and in the open field. I think Taylor has the acceleration to reach the secondary, the power to run through defenders at this level, and the speed to at least maintain the separation he initially earned with his burst, so he can prolong the run and force defensive backs to give chase.
All right, Notre Dame's Jadarian Price. Price has mobile hips. He adjusts his stride length and pace to set up rushing lanes, and he keeps his knees and feet high as he runs past low shots, and he drops his weight deep enough for strong acceleration. Pace also possesses curvilinear speed, so he doesn't have to make hard cuts with every run. Price got to keep his feet tighter when he's setting up moves while tight to the line of scrimmage, though, because he doesn't operate from a place of balance when this happens, and it limits the expression of his other skills. All right, Jaden Nixon, UCF. Ashton Jeanty actually backed up Jaden Nixon in high school. I thought that was fascinating in the same way that, Saquon Barkley was 188 pounds as a freshman at Penn State. Things can change fast when there's still a lot of room for growth. Nixon is one of those players who may have been surpassed by Jeanty, but he's a promising runner. He doesn't, and I would say it doesn't really diminish Nixon's value as a potential NFL contributor that Jeanty has surpassed him. He's explosive. He has elite speed and acceleration, and he sees the field well in space and in traffic and between the tackles. He sets up runs well. He mitigates penetration, and he really understands how to manage his risk based on game script and field position. He's a fascinating player. He's a lighter player, but he's one that I'd keep an eye on, as a UDFA type. Jaden Ott, Between the tackles, Ott has some clear strengths and weaknesses, and when running against tight boxes, he's patient. He reads leverage well. He takes what the defense gives him. But when running against heavier boxes, he makes ill-advised cutbacks and bounces, and that's something that you notice that he's more of a space player. Jamal Haynes of Georgia Tech. The biggest question is whether Haynes can make a living between the tackles. The outlook would seem more promising if Haynes could gain, 10 to 15 pounds and have a frame that Aaron Jones has right now. It's likely that as a college slot receiver for most of his career that Haynes will get a chance to add some quick twitch muscle to his frame. And if he's able to do that, then I think you're going to see a player who could perform well. If we remember, Kyle Williams is a much less explosive player and only weighed a few pounds more than Haynes when Williams entered the league. And Bucky Irving arrived at 5'9", 192. So there's going to be a public referendum on Irving, of course, being, maybe that his size is an obstacle to full-time volume. But still, anytime there's a running back that weighs less than 200 pounds, there's going to be questions. So for the sake of Haynes' elevator pitch here, let's project that Haynes follows Williams, Jones, and Jahmyr Gibbs, and a few other backs who shared this height and weight and then gained weight to get over 200 pounds after entering the league. If Haynes gets between 205 to 210 pounds and maintains or adds more explosion in the process, there's skills there to mine in terms of becoming a starter in the NFL. He's good at setting up pullers, setting up double teams in gap zone or inside zone, and he has leverage reading skills to do the job. And despite his dynamic speed and acceleration and quickness, he's also shown wise decision making based on game script and down and distance. And when defenses foil blocking schemes early, Haynes has a good feel for the pursuit and finds solutions. Jay Ducker of, I believe it's Rutgers, or maybe it's Temple. I don't remember where Jay's. I got to look up where Jay's at. Sorry, folks. You'll see it right on the RSP. Jay Ducker, it's been a while since I watched him other than, earlier this year. Ducker's a cutback runner. He attacks tight creases with discipline, and he sets up defenders and blocks with effective footwork. He's got efficient moves to work around or over contact. And when you get him in the open field, he has skill to layer moves in succession and make multiple defenders miss. When he reaches the secondary and he's got a downhill runway, he can hold off pursuit for 30 to 40 yards because he has strong play stamina with all that movement. Jam Miller of Alabama. Speed and acceleration are going to be the key for Miller. When he reaches the second level, he can at least hold off, if not accelerate past most linebackers in the secondary. Now, he played hurt in 2025, and the speed was not there. But if you go back to 2024, you'll see him split linebackers and safeties up the middle for field flipping gains. So if he has enough acceleration to reach the secondary, he's dangerous. I just don't know if he has enough of that. Jeremiah Love, Notre Dame. Now, he's not just a speedster. Love wins against contact, often multiple points of contact during the same touch. He bounces off hits of all three levels of defenders, and it's because he attacks collisions. A lot of backs don't do this well anymore, but when you can initiate the chain of contact or the chain of actions that happen in a collision, you usually have a chance to work away from that colliding defender, and Love does that well. Washington's Jonah Coleman. Once Coleman's past the line of scrimmage, he has to learn to leverage his size and get downhill fast. He's too prone to bouncing plays outside pursuit, and he ends up slanting inside thinking that he's going to find openings against the grain of the defense's flow. And he's just not that explosive or that agile to do this. He's big. What he should be doing is sticking his foot in the ground and forcing the pursuit to hit him from angles that won't bring Coleman to the ground as easily. But he gets tackled too easily for his size. Indiana's Kalen Black. Black's a smart runner. He's got cutback ability. I think he attacks downhill with ferocity for his size. and he finds cutbacks with deep presses into the line. But when it's time to just hit a crease as designed, he'll get skinny through that crease. Black's got good footwork. He understands how to manipulate defenders with pace and stride changes, and he has that dynamic jump stop and spin to avoid late shots. And if Black can get his feet higher in traffic, I think he could be even tougher to bring to the turf. Penn State's Katron Allen. Allen's got the mobile hips to make those 90-degree changes of direction efficiently that are valuable. He adjusts his stride length and pace to set up blockers in pursuit. And when he's in the open field, he can deliver combinations of moves to set up unblocked defenders. If there's a move, Allen has it, and he delivers it with the confidence and occasional dynamism of a contributor. But speed and acceleration, those are the weaknesses of Allen's ball carrying. They're good enough for him to make an active roster in the NFL, maybe even contribute as a running back too, at least on paper. But when you look at the current reality of the NFL, there's a glut of running back talent. And most backs on depth charts in the league have starter-level acceleration and speed, and not what most NFL combine followers think is starter-level explosion. It's even slower than that. But the RSP's minimum standards for that, they have. And when you consider that Allen's speed and acceleration are closer to the minimum for a contributor and not a starter, well, most reserves are closer to the starter tier. Kajon Owens, University of South Florida. He's good at adjusting his gait. He can get as good at lifting his feet and knees high in traffic as he is against unblocked defenders coming downhill to shoot for him. He could be dangerous because when he finishes, he takes on linebackers, he bounces off hits, he breaks through reaches, and he pulls wrapping defenders downhill. He's a low-to-the-ground runner who may have a little more there than people realize. South Alabama's Kentrell Bullock. Bullock's got a low center of gravity, strong contact balance to win against box defenders near the line, and he sets up gap plays effectively. I think his decision-making with zone blocking is competent because he gets within at least 2 steps of traffic when pressing blocks, and his footwork and ability to bend away from pursuit is a strength of his game. He weaves between defenders at a good pace. But his speed just is not as strong as initial acceleration and quickness. So, that's something to be aware of there with him. All right. LaShawn Williams of Kansas, formerly of Iowa. He's fast enough to reach the secondary, and once he does, he outruns defenders or takes angles to prolong the chase. He has mobile hips, efficient footwork, and dynamic cuts. And he has deceleration and a stop-start movement that often forces pursuit to overrun angles. So he makes defenders miss in succession with his movement. And if he could just learn, if Williams could just learn to get his feet over low shots more often, I think he'd be in the elite tier of the elusiveness category. He has a low center of gravity, and his size makes him a bowling ball who can push the pile or drag defenders and work through hits, wraps, and reaches. So some of these obstacles Williams works through just during the same carry. So, he's a compelling running back who does a really good job holding on to the football too. Le'Veon Moss, Texas A&M, he attacks creases with urgency. That's what I love about him. He's decisive. He sets up blocks on perimeter runs. And he is good at taking what defenses give him in the green zone, which is vital. But he also has a bad habit of cutting back on gap plays because he's running to open space instead of sticking with the play design. And he's got to learn to show more patience with gap plays like counter. Now, few backs these days accelerate into collisions anymore, but Moss is one of those guys that does. It makes him a capable tackle breaker who wins collisions with linebackers and safeties. So, definitely valuable at the point of attack or collision. Lincoln Parry, I'm trying to think where I had Lincoln Parry from. Texas State, yes. Texas State's Lincoln Parr. Parr opens his hips efficiently with the point of his toes to the boundary. He has effective pressure cuts in the crease. He slides well laterally when he opens his hips so he can work across the crease and look for an open hole for the bounce or the cutback. He has a violent stick, and he often uses it to bait defenders crashing into the box from the edge. and he uses a double up at the edge of the box to set up safeties coming downhill. He also has jump cuts to avoid even cornerbacks playing that force roll and cut back inside. And he can use that jump cut well to change direction after a tight press to the line. He's even very good at adjusting stride length and pacing to set up blocks. He'll hurdle low cut attempts to his legs in the open field, and he even has some curvilinear speed. So pretty agile for a running back. Mike Washington Jr. of Arkansas. I think the concern with Washington's game, in addition to fumbling, is yardage that he leaves on the field because he just doesn't finish runs with optimal form. It's not every run that he does this with, but there are enough runs on his tape that it's a habit. It's a bad habit. And it's not acceptable practice for running backs to turn their backs into contact, especially against smaller defenders. And the problem is that Washington doesn't see what he's hitting. He turns his power base away from its ideal placement to generate explosion or a push. And Washington is giving the opposition more surface area to strike him because his pads are no longer low and he's not moving with high knees and feet through contact. You're not even facing his knees and feet that way. So all of this weakens Washington's push, his contact balance, his ability to pull defenders and reduce surface level from tackle attempts, and strikes at the ball. This happens more often too. So Washington's, may still be strong and generate push with his back to the opposition, but it should be the last resort and not his primary approach to finishing. So when you think about the skill and athletic ability that narrows the margins for success or failure in the NFL, the league often magnifies these issues with detail. And if Washington isn't getting the hard yards and he's fumbling, his role's going to shrink. And if he doesn't address these issues, he could become a top-tier if he addresses the issues, he could become a top-tier power back. He's got excellent speed. But if he doesn't, he could be just an inconsistent producer who has big play moments, but a reputation for too many errors in between. UCF has another back that you guys definitely should be paying attention to, and that's Miles Montgomery. His processing information is one of his true strengths. Montgomery sees what's happening early, accurately, and it helps him be a step ahead of opponents. He's an accurate runner with efficient moves. He can mitigate the impact of defensive penetration, and that foils plays early as well as, what am I saying? He's someone with his processing information. He's going to see what happens early and accurately, and he's creative enough with his movement, and it's efficient enough that defensive penetration that would normally foil a play early is something that Montgomery is able to avoid and at least help him produce as a short yardage runner. Montgomery knows when to attack tight creases, when to create, and when to stick with the play. And he has some lapses, though, where he overthinks his decision about playing it safe versus taking a risk and errs on the playing it safe side. But I think overall, Montgomery's one of the most underrated movers for his position in this class. And I think the thing that sets him apart is his processing of info and that refined skill for combining movement and pacing to generate the desired result. Nicholas Singleton, he's a well-built runner from Penn State who can pull through reaches from all three levels of defenders. And when he encounters defenders in his path that he can't avoid, he accelerates into the collision with good pad level. And whatever the angle of collision, Singleton can bounce off hits of linebackers, and he forces opponents to gang tackle him. The fact that he'll, accelerate into the collision point, that's a rarity. Like I said earlier, Singleton has that skill too. O.J. Arnold of Georgia Southern, he's a capable tight crease runner on gap plays. He can find the cutback lanes. He's efficient with his footwork, and he knows how to set up creases with his movement. And when he needs a dynamic solution, he has explosive lateral cuts. Rasul Faison from South Carolina, he's got good vision and additional value to unlock there because he identifies interior penetration. He finds solutions to avoid defenders. There's runs where you could see it maybe a step earlier and have a little better plan to avoid the defender, but he's also very effective against edge penetration, more effective there actually. He's a decisive gap runner, and I think he presses creases when running
running behind zone blocking. He reads the leverage effectively when he's, as if he's running downhill on duo, and bends away from penetration into the crease. He's also effective at setting up linebackers into the wrong gap and then splitting a double team to earn positive yards. Patient zone runner, rides the wave in tight quarters to work across his blocks until he presses linebackers into one crease to cut back to another. Overall, an effective tight crease runner. He can get skinny, work through contact to the second level, and he's patient. Robert Henry, UTSA. I think he has the tools to develop into a route runner who can match up effectively against most defenders assigned to running backs out of the backfield. He could also develop into a matchup threat against some safeties because of his ability to decelerate after, earning a good pace downhill. Henry tracks the ball well. He high points. He catches targets arriving over his shoulder. He makes receptions with late hands, so he's not tipping off the tight coverage. He errs on the side of attacking targets early with overhand position rather than just allowing the ball into his frame. That's great. So Henry also excels at transitioning downhill as soon as he catches the ball. The only real lapse that I've seen with his receiving game thus far is that he's turned downfield before securing the ball and dropped the target because he lost focus. Henry wins targets against tight coverage and contact, and I think it's reasonable to expect to see Henry develop into a plus receiver in the NFL at this position. Roman Hemby of Indiana, he has a real feel for setting up good angles for himself and taking away good angles from defenders. Hemby attacks lanes decisively on gap runs. He sets up double teams on duo with good stride, length, and pacing adjustments, and when he's forced to bounce, he opens his hips efficiently. So when he reaches to the edge of the defense, he also can decelerate efficiently to transition downhill. Hemby finishes runs with starter-level power and contact balance. His ball security track record is excellent, too. I think this is a guy that can earn volume and deliver if called upon to do so. Seth McGowan. McGowan's agility is good enough to contribute in a gap scheme, but he's going to struggle in a high-end contributing role if asked to run a zone scheme. His footwork lacks the precision and balance for the baseline creativity that's needed for that scheme. McGowan's power and contact balance just isn't as good as his size might lead people to believe. He can win against some linebackers, but most of his success against collisions comes against defensive backs. He'll drag defenders and generate a push in the box, but he lacks top-end power. Shamari Lawrence, Missouri State. He's an intelligent decision maker. He reads the line of scrimmage effectively, and he's got efficient and dynamic movement, and he's quick and fast enough to beat box defenders. Sometimes he can beat all three levels of the defense depending on the play design. Sia Bengora is from Ohio. I think his best traits and skills are vision and decision-making, power, contact balance into direct hits, and power, and ball security. But even with those traits being on the good side, really the only one that's starter quality is contact balance. The rest is kind of more of a rotational committee player off the bench. If he can deliver on special teams, maybe he makes an NFL roster. Maybe it gives him time to hone his skills and athletic ability just enough to maybe get a career as a backup. TJ Harden. He's agile. He's out of SMU. He's an agile bulldozer who protects the ball. He decelerates efficiently. He's got dynamic jump cuts and spins in tight quarters. This helps him mitigate pursuit angles. And he pairs his moves well and often turns losses into gains. Harden has only 2 fumbles in nearly 600 career carries, or touches, excuse me. He's definitely not one of those power backs with poor technique that gets exploited whenever in traffic or fighting for extra yards. This was not like rookie year reader Adrian Peterson, that's for sure. Now, Zach Palmer-Smith out of UAB, he's a decisive and powerful runner. Palmer not only runs through contact and pushes piles, but he also gets his feet over low shots and efficiently transitions downhill on perimeter runs. Palmer-Smith isn't a breakaway threat, but he can reach the secondary with a good runway on outside zone or gap plays. He's got efficient deceleration, which can help him make defenders miss in space or set up angles where he can run through the pursuit. So there you have it. 45 of the 56
running backs that I've looked at for the 2026 RSP. You can order it at mattwaldman.com. You're going to get cheat sheets within the RSP that are ranked by the depth of talent score that I use to grade their value. But you can also see them sorted in a variety of other ways to just kind of see how these guys perform in different circumstances. And you even get, you get these analysis in how I break these players up into tiers, so you can see who's the best or worst in each tier of skill sets that I grade. So again, an interesting and instructive draft guide that also gives you value in fantasy in addition to learning more about the football game as a whole. So mattwaldman.com, $21.95. It'll be available April 1st. I'll email folks when it is ready, and then you can use the login and the password that you created to download the RSP in PDF form. It is meant to be downloaded, not just access from the site. All right. Thanks again, folks. Appreciate you. I'll be back with a quarterback podcast within the next couple of days here. Thanks again.